Episode 1. She only twitched when praying. They noticed it the very first night. Sister Elena had just arrived at the remote convent of Santa Luca, a stone fortress lost in the green hills of northern Italy. The kind of place that hadn't changed in 100 years. No cell phones, no clocks, and no mirrors. She was quiet, too quiet. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, even during hymns. But when she knelt for evening prayer, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. Her hands trembled, her lips quivered, but by the second Ave Maria, her fingers curled inwards like claws, and her shoulders jerked with invisible force. Sister Carmela saw it first. "She is having a seizure," she whispered. "No," whispered Mother Beatrice, the head nun, her eyes narrowing. "She's praying." The room grew cold. Though no windows were open, the flame of the chapel candle bent sideways, like it was fleeing from her. Then came the voice, not loud, not screaming, but deep, too deep for a 23-year-old girl who barely spoke above silence. She was still kneeling, eyes shut tight, but the voice said clearly, "And the dead shall speak in her silence." Their secrets were right on her tongue. The room stood frowning. Elena collapsed. They tried to question her that night, but she remembered nothing. Not the prayer, not the voice, not the twitching. "I felt peace," she said, "warmth, like something holy touched me." But it wasn't holiness that had touched her, at least, not the kind they knew. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Every time she began to pray, her body would contort, her voice would change, and she would say things, strange things. Latin phrases from nowhere, names of people who had died decades ago, descriptions of sins no one should have known. During a morning mass, she whispered into the ear of an elderly nun, "You buried your baby under the fig tree behind the east wall." The nun fainted before communion. No one ever spoke of the fig tree again. Word spread quickly. Some believed she was gifted a vessel for divine messages. Others were convinced it was demonic possession. The Vatican sent no one. Not yet. At church, as always, waited. But the sisters couldn't wait. One night, they bound Elena's wrists with rosary beads and placed a relic of Saint Agnes in her hands. She didn't resist. She even smiled. And when she whispered her prayer again, they expected another riddle from beyond. Instead, she said this, "Do you think God can't scream?" Then she began laughing. Not a child's laugh, not even a woman's. It was ancient, hollow, and it echoed against the stone walls, like something was trying to claw its way out of her throat. That night, Sister Carmela had a dream. Elena stood in the chapel, her eyes pitch black, her lips stitched shut with silver thread. She wasn't praying, she was listening. From behind the altar, something whispered, "Keep praying, child. That's how I find my way in." Carmela woke up bleeding from the ears, and Elena, she had already gone to the chapel to pray again. Episode 2. The first prophecy from her lips. They made her pray in private now. Each night, Sister Elena was led silently into the old stone chapel alone, while the others watched from behind a cracked wooden door. No one dared speak during her prayers. They didn't even breathe loudly. They only listened, like terrified children outside a locked room, where something unholy cried softly in the dark. It had been 6 nights since the first voice, and Elena still remembered nothing. She knelt again beneath the dim light of the sanctuary lamp, hands folded over her chest, her lips moved. The same soft prayers, the same sacred rhythm, until the moment came. A pause, a single breath, and then the voice returned. "One shall die before the moon bleeds. Her habit hides the blade." The words slid from Elena's mouth like cold smoke. They didn't feel spoken, they felt pushed, like something inside her wanted out. Behind the door, 5 nuns looked at one another in silence. Moon bleeds. A blade. Was it metaphor, madness, or a warning? Sister Antonia laughed nervously. "It's nonsense," she whispered. "Just delusions dressed up as prophecy." But that night, after the final bell rang, Sister Mariella was found dead in the laundry room, her wrists sliced open, a blood-soaked rosary clenched in her hand. She had been wearing her veil inside out. A nun's mistake, or a quiet signal. By dawn, whispers turned to panic. She knew. Someone muttered. Elena knew. the Mother Superior summoned the priest from the nearby parish, Father Matteo, an aging man with a faltering voice and shaking hands. He had seen possessions before, or so he said. She doesn't thrash. She doesn't spit. No foam. No violence. He said after watching Elena pray. Whatever this is, it wants to be heard. He tried Latin blessings. Nothing changed. He held a crucifix to her brow. No reaction. But when he said the name Gabriel, the archangel, Elena flinched. Her head jerked, and in a voice not her own, she whispered, "He is not who you think he is." Then silence, then sobbing, but not from her, from him. Father Matteo fell to his knees, trembling. "It's not a demon," he said, shaking. "It's something older." That night, Elena didn't sleep. Her hands were cold, but her body burned. When Sister Carmela checked on her, she found her awake, eyes open wide, watching the crucifix on the wall. "I don't want to pray anymore," Elena whispered. Carmela said nothing. "Every time I speak to God," Elena continued, "He answers me in a voice that isn't his." She turned her head slowly. "And I think he's getting closer." Carmela backed away, heart pounding. "Closer to what?" she asked, voice dry as dust. Elena smiled softly, dreamlike, to being let in. Outside the convent, the moon rose. It was red, like blood on linen, and somewhere deep beneath the stone chapel, the ancient pipes groaned not from pressure, but from breath. Something was breathing through the walls. And Elena, she knelt again and prayed. Episode 3, The Hands That Moved Without Her Will. By now, Sister Elena had become the ghost of the convent. She walked the stone corridors like a sleepwalker. She barely spoke. She barely ate. But each night, at exactly 3:07 a.m., she slipped into the chapel and knelt in the same spot as if summoned. They tried locking her door. They heard her praying from inside anyway. They tried removing the crucifix from her room. It was back the next day, nailed to the wall, dripping wax from candles no one had lit. It was Sister Luca who noticed the hands. She had gone to observe Elena's nightly ritual from the shadows of the upper gallery, a place cloaked in cobwebs and secrets. She watched in silence, rosary clenched so tight her fingers bled. Elena sat her day still for a long time, eyes shut, lips moving in soft, reverent rhythm. Then something changed. Her hands, resting peacefully on her lap, began to rise, not quickly, not violently, but deliberately, like marionettes lifted by invisible strings. They hovered in the air, trembling, palms open, as if awaiting an offering, or giving one. Then her fingers began to write, not on paper, not on the pew, in the air, letters, symbols, curves traced slowly, like etchings on glass. Luca gasped, because what she saw wasn't just some divine gesture. Elena's hands were spelling out words, Latin, ancient Latin. She scribbled the same 3 lines over and over. Nolitaner of flammum Dei, custos venit sine alas, ora et non te fides. Do not touch the flame of God, the guardian comes without wings. Pray, but do not trust your faith. The next morning, when Luca reported it to Mother Beatrice, the older woman went pale. Those lines, they matched a passage from an apocryphal gospel burned by the Inquisition in 1467. A gospel that should not exist. They brought in a linguist from Florence, an ex-priest turned historian named Francesco Albi. He was skeptical, but intrigued. When he interviewed Elena, she was lucid, kind, gentle. He asked, "Do you know Latin?" She smiled faintly. "Just the basics. Church hymns." He nodded, then handed her a pen and blank paper. "Could you write down what you remember from your prayers last night?" She looked confused. "I don't remember anything," he insisted. She obeyed, but as soon as the pen touched the page, her hand jerked violently, her fingers spasmed, then steadied, and then, faster than thought, she began to write. Lines, symbols, circles within circles, not just words, sigils, diagrams, clips from a language that shouldn't exist. She filled 12 pages without blinking, then dropped the pen. Francesco turned white, because within those lines were fragments he had seen once, buried in a sealed Vatican archive labeled Non Humanis Lingua, a dead tongue, a tongue that had never been spoken aloud until now. That night, Elena didn't wait until 3:07. she began praying at sunset, alone in that chapel, candlelight flickering, her hands twitching like they held invisible fire. Sister Carmela crept in to watch, just once, just for a minute, and that's when she saw it. Elena's hands were raised again, but this time, they weren't drawing symbols. They were signing, in ancient sign language monastic hand code, the phrase, "He stands behind you." Carmela turned. No one was there, but the candle beside her hissed and went out. Episode 4. The exorcist who was afraid to touch her. They had delayed it for too long. After Elena's hands wrote in the air, signed in tongues, and summoned silence that felt watched, Mother Beatrice could no longer justify inaction. The church had to be involved, but the Vatican did not send who they had hoped for. Instead of a seasoned exorcist with medals and books and conviction, they sent Father Angelo Silvestri, a man who hadn't performed a single rite in over a decade. His hair was snow white, but not from age. His eyes were tired, not wise. He wore his collar like a wound. They said you knew how to deal with possession. Beatrice said, "I did," he replied softly, "until I realized some things don't want to leave," because they were never invited in. They brought him to Elena after Vespers. She Saturday in a small stone chamber, lit by only a single candle and the distant hum of chanted psalms. Her wrists rested on her knees. Her lips moved, though no sound came. Father Angelo entered with a crucifix, a flask of holy water, and a book bound in cracked leather, the 1614 Ritual Romanum. He made it exactly 3 steps before he frowned. Elena turned toward him. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't even see, but they knew. "Good evening, Father," she said. Her voice was not her own. It was layered as if someone else was speaking beneath her, like the mouths in one throat. "I'm here to help you, child," he said. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was ancient. "I'm not the one who needs help," she whispered. "You brought your fear with you. Would you like me to show them what you did in the seminary cellar?" His knees buckled. He hadn't told anyone about that night in 1983, not even God. He fumbled for the crucifix, lifted it shakily. "Elena," he began, "in the name of Christ." She began humming, a lullaby, not Italian, not Latin, Aramaic, and as she hummed, the candle in the room flickered and bent not to the wind, but to the hum itself. It moved in rhythm. It obeyed. "Stop," Angelo said, voice trembling. Elena looked up. "I can't," she said softly. "I only hum when I'm asleep." Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed, and for a moment, everything was still, until the candle exploded in a hiss of wax and flame, and across the wall behind her, a single word burned into the stone. "Stay." Father Angelo fled. He didn't bless her, didn't touch her, didn't finish the rite. He left the convent before sunrise. When asked why, he only said, "That girl isn't possessed. That would be too easy. She's being used, like a puppet whose strings are held by something that still remembers the stars before they were named." He wept on the steps of his car before driving off. Elena didn't wake until dawn. When she did, she was humming again the same lullaby. When Sister Carmela asked her what she dreamed of, Elena responded in a whisper, "I was in a chapel, but underground. The crucifix was upside down, and the altar was made of mirrors. A voice was praying to me." Carmela didn't sleep that night, because that wasn't a dream. It was a description of a secret chapel hidden beneath the convent. A chapel no one had entered in 300 years. Episode 5, Confessions from the Abyss. The hidden chapel beneath Santa Luca hadn't been spoken of in generations. It was more rumor than reality, whispered about by elder nuns as a place where the first abbess had sealed away her shame, her sins, and perhaps her soul. No one had the key. No one wanted to, until now, because Elena had described it perfectly. 3 sisters descended before Don Carmela, Luca, and young sister Ines, whose hands never stopped shaking. They followed the ancient stairwell behind the vestry, lit only by the dull glow of a brass lantern. The air grew heavier with each step, like they were walking not down, but inward. When the final stone gave way, they found a narrow wooden door rotted at the corners, sealed by a rusted iron lock, but the lock had already been broken, as if someone or something had beaten into it. Inside, they found what Elena had seen, an altar of mirrors, each pane cracked, dust covered, yet still reflecting just enough to show warped fragments of their own faces. A single iron crucifix hung upside down from the ceiling by a chain. No candles, no scripture, but the room remembered prayer. You could feel it, and something else, a presence. Meanwhile, Elena knelt once more in the upstairs chapel. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She only whispered, and as she did, her voice echoed through the empty halls, impossibly loud for so soft a sound. It was not prayer, it was confession, but not hers. Forgive me, Mother, for I have sinned. I desired Sister Isadora. I touched her while she slept. Forgive me, Lord. I poisoned the bread before Vespers. I wanted silence. I got it. Forgive me. I buried the baby beside the east wall. No one must ever find her. One by one, voices spoke through her mouth. Names long dead, scenes long buried, secrets no living soul should know. Upstairs, Sister Beatrice listened in horror. Each sin Elena confessed was once kept locked in the convent's vault, old parchments sealed in wax, accessible only to the Mother Superior. And yet now, they spewed from Elena like poison drawn from a wound. Beatrice clutched her rosary so hard, it snapped. She ran to the girl, tried to shake her, but Elena did not blink. Her hands were folded, her lips parted, and when she opened her eyes, they were not her eyes. The pupils were clouded white, like milk spilled into ink. Her mouth smiled to wide, to knowing, and she whispered, gently, now it's your turn, Mother. Beatrice frowned. No, she said, backing away. You don't know anything. Elena tilted her head. You knelt before the bishop when you were 17, and he gave you absolution. Before he gave you his belt. The silence cracked like thunder. Beatrice sank to the ground, gasping. No one knew. She whispered. Elena leaned in, voice suddenly small. Her own again. That's not true. Below, in the secret chapel, the sisters found a journal beneath the altar bound in black leather. Pages stiff with time. They opened it. There were no words, only handprints, pressed in ash, down scenes, hundreds, some small, some massive, some with too many fingers, and at the very end, one single phrase written in red. All sins return to the mouth that first whispered them. That night, Elena didn't pray. She simply sat her day beneath the crucifix and whispered names to the air. And from deep in the walls, something whispered them back. Episode 6, a mirror that reflected her soul. The mirror arrived unannounced, wrapped in burlap, thick with dust, and leaning silently against the chapel wall when the sisters awoke. No one claimed to have placed it there. No record existed of its storage. And yet, it bore the unmistakable crest of the convent's founder, a lamb pierced by thorns. It was oval-shaped, framed in rusted gold, with words etched along its rim, Vidibus Tisicates. You shall see yourself as you truly are, Mother Beatrice ordered. It covered at once. But Sister Ines, curious and too young to be wise, peeled the burlap back before anyone noticed. She screamed, not because she saw herself, but because she saw Elena, standing behind her. Though Elena was locked in her cell, the mirror was taken to the old library, hidden behind curtains. But strange things began to happen almost immediately. Books fell from high shelves, opened to pages about divine judgment and false reflections. Candles sputtered and died. And worst of all, the mirror kept uncovering itself. Every morning, the burlap lay on the floor, as if something inside wanted to be seen. Elena had not spoken since the last confession, but she watched. She stood at her window for hours, her gaze locked on nothing, except it wasn't nothing. She was listening again. Her lips moved, but no words came. When Sister Carmela finally brought her a bowl of broth, Elena turned and asked, calmly, have you seen your face in it yet? Carmela frowned. In what? The mirror, Elena whispered. The one that watches back. Then, softly, almost tender, it doesn't show sin, it shows what owns you. By nightfall, Sister Luca could no longer resist. She returned to the library alone, candle in hand, heart thudding like thunder in a tomb. She stood before the mirror, uncovered it. At first, she saw herself, pale, hollow-eyed, normal. Then, her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. Her candle flickered, her reflection smiled, but she hadn't. and then the face in the glass leaned forward, closer, closer, until it whispered, though its mouth never opened, "You buried it, but it remembers." Luca dropped the candle, screamed. By the time the others found her, she was trembling, rocking on the library floor, mumbling the same phrase again and again. "No shadows have teeth, no shadows have teeth." But she wouldn't stop bleeding from her palms, as if something had clawed its way out through her hands. Back in her cell, Elena sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing invisible lines in the air. When asked what she was doing, she answered, "Drawing my reflection." And when Sister Inez asked her what she saw in it, Elena smiled, something patient. That evening, a final test was planned. Mother Beatrice, despite her trembling faith, stood before the mirror with a relic in one hand and holy water in the other. The room was full, no secrets this time. She looked in, nothing happened, until the mirror cracked. Not shattered, not broken, but split, directly down the center, dividing her face into two different expressions. One calm, one weeping, and as the room fell into silence, everyone heard a sound, a soft whisper, not from the mirror, from Elena's lips. Back in her locked cell, now we know which side she prays with. That night, no one prayed aloud, and the mirror, it had vanished. Episode 7, she prayed, and the walls bled. It began with the scent, not blood, something worse. Copper mixed with incense, like a mass held inside a wound. The scent wafted through the convent halls just after compline, slithering beneath doors and coiling into lungs. The sisters gagged. One vomited. Another began to pray in broken Latin, her hands trembling. But Elena, she smiled. "It's not the walls," she whispered. "It's the memory in them." They found the first stain in the east corridor, a slow, glistening drip of deep red trailing down the stone, thick as syrup. The stain pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat. At first, they thought it was rust, then old paint. Then Sister Carmela touched it and screamed. Her fingers blistered immediately, as if the wall itself had burned her with something holy or unholy. And that's when they saw the writing. It hadn't been painted, it had bled. 4 words, Domus me non tacet, my house shall not be silent. Mother Beatrice sealed the chapel. No one was to enter, no one was to pray aloud. Silence was declared sacred, but silence, it seemed, belonged to something else. That night, in the stillness, moaning rose from the pipes. The stone floors sweated. Crucifixes trembled on their nails, and from behind Elena's locked door came the sound of weeping, soft, rhythmic, almost melodic. When Sister Inez peeked through the keyhole, she gasped. Elena was praying again, and as she whispered, the walls around her were weeping too. Blood leaked from the corners of her ceiling, down the mortar lines like veins bursting beneath skin. It wasn't just one room. It wasn't even just the chapel. The entire convent was bleeding. At dawn, Father Matteo, the same exorcist who had once fled, returned. He hadn't slept in days. Something had drawn him back. A dream, a voice, or perhaps guilt. This time, he didn't speak to Elena. He followed her from a distance, from behind corners, every step she took, every breath, every whispered word. And that's when he noticed it. She never walked randomly. Every hallway she passed, every chamber she paused in, they matched the stations of the cross. Not physically, spiritually, symbolically. Each room mirrored one of Christ's sufferings. And each time she prayed in one, that wall bled. This wasn't madness. It was a ritual, a reverse pilgrimage. Father Matteo confronted her in the garden. "Elena," he begged, "do you know what you're doing?" She turned. Her hands were stained red, though she had touched no wounds. She looked up at him, eyes wide, innocent. "I'm just following the voice," she said. "What voice?" He whispered. She leaned in, close enough for him to smell that same burning copper incense, the one that prays through me. That night, the convent chapel shook, not from thunder, not from storm, from something inside. The altar cracked, the floor split, and in the center, beneath the crucifix, a fissure opened in the stone, revealing a staircase downward to a place no one remembered, except, perhaps, Elena, because as the sister stared in horror, she stepped forward and whispered, "The blood was never meant to be cleaned. It was meant to guide." Episode 8, The Forbidden Manuscript, she whispered. The staircase beneath the altar hadn't been touched in centuries. It spiraled downward into darkness so thick it swallowed light. No torches lined the walls. No handrails. No crosses, just stone steps worn smooth by time and things that moved without feet. Elena walked down without hesitation. The others followed, reluctantly. They didn't know what awaited them, but she did. At the bottom lay a crypt, circular, carved from black rock. The air was thick, like breathing through wool soaked in ash. Along the walls were old shelves, holding what appeared to be reliquaries, but they held no bones, no saints, only books. Books that bore no titles, no covers. Some were bound in cracked animal hide, others stitched with silver thread. One pulsed faintly as if breathing. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it lay a single manuscript, open to a page written in faded red ink. Its text slanted diagonally across the parchment, as if scrawled in haste or ecstasy. Elena approached it, her fingers hovering above the page, never touching. Then she began to speak. Not read, speak. The words came in a language none of them knew. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek. It wasn't even human. It slithered from her tongue like oil on fire, harsh, with syllables that shouldn't exist in any holy place. The temperature dropped instantly. Sister Elena collapsed. Shaking, Carmela dropped her rosary. Even Mother Beatrice fell to her knees, unable to breathe, as though the very air refused to carry those syllables. Only Father Matteo remained standing barely. Elena, it groped. Stop. Whatever it is, you're inviting it in. But Elena's eyes had turned pitch black. No iris, no white, just void. She kept chanting, and the manuscript's pages began to turn themselves, one by one, faster, then faster. The ink glowed faintly red. The book vibrated, and then, as if struck by unseen lightning, the final page ripped itself out, hovered in the air for a moment, and then seared into Elena's chest like branding iron. She collapsed. The room went silent. The manuscript slammed shut. Hours passed before she awoke. They carried her back to her cell, her skin burning with fever, her breath shallow. When they checked her chest, they found no wound, no blood, only a faint mark, a circle of symbols, etched into her skin like ink that bled inward. When she finally opened her eyes, she spoke in a whisper. The book was never meant to be read. Carmela clutched her hand. Elena, why did you speak those words? Elena turned, her face strangely serene. I didn't. It did. That night, strange symbols appeared on the convent walls, not drawn grown, like vines of black language, curling along bricks, trailing into rooms. The sisters scrubbed. They repainted. The symbols came back, more each time. And now, when Elena prayed, she no longer twitched. She glowed, not with light, not with grace, with heat, like something within her was alive and waking up. Father Matteo returned to the crypt alone. He flipped through the manuscript with gloved hands, refusing to read aloud. At that very back, hidden between the glued pages, he found a single note, not ancient, but written in modern ink. A warning: this is not the voice of hell. It is the voice of before. Do not answer it. It turned pale, and from far above, echoing through the stone, came Elena's voice, even though she had not left her room. Too late. Episode 9, the night heaven answered back. No one slept that night. The convent was silent, not the peaceful silence of prayer, but that terrible, stretched thin quiet of something holding its breath. The symbols that had crawled across the walls now bled faint golden light, pulsing like veins under skin. Elena had stopped speaking altogether. She lay in bed, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, but her chest did not rise and fall. She wasn't breathing, and yet she was alive. Just after midnight, that chapel bells rang. 3 slow tolls, then silence. No one had touched the rope. No one stirred the tower, but they all heard it. And then came the voice. It started as a hum, soft, warm, melodic, vibrating through the stone and floorboards. The sound made the crosses in every room tilt slightly. Candles lit without flame just hovered midair. The sound came from above, not the ceiling, not the sky, something higher. Then a voice joined the hum, neither male nor female, too wide to be human, too soft to be terrifying, but every word it spoke bled into the mind, like honey dipped in fire. She opened the gate that was never sealed. She woke the blood that remembers the beginning. She must finish what was started beneath the altar of silence. The sisters collapsed to their knees. Some wept, some screamed, but none could speak because their tongues refused to move. In her room, Elena sat her day up. Still no breath, still no blink, but her eyes were open and full of stars. Not metaphorically, literally. Tiny constellations shimmered in her pupils. Galaxies orbiting in slow spirals, as if the cosmos had taken root behind her gaze. Sister Ines, who had stayed behind to pray beside her, whispered in awe, Are you still you? Elena turned slowly, smiled faintly, and said, There is no me. There is only the voice wearing me like memory. Meanwhile, Father Matteo had locked himself in the library with every forbidden text he could find. He poured through centuries of lost gospels, burnt testimonies, notes from heretics who vanished into ash. And then he found it, a single sentence, in the margin of an unbound parchment, smuggled from a monastery in Syria. When heaven answers back, it is not always to save you. At 3:07 a.m., the exact hour Elena had always been drawn to pray, the chapel doors blew open, without wind, without force, simply opened, and a sound poured through, not thunder, not wind, winds, millions of them, feathers brushing eternity, and in the center of that sound, descending from nowhere, came light, not pure, not blinding, but bruised, like gold tarnished with old grief. It took shape above the altar, a figure, shifting, cloaked in robes that flickered between angelic and charred. Its face was veiled in flame. Its hands were open, one held a sword made of bone, the other, a book that bled. The sisters screamed, but the figure did not move. It only looked at Elena, who had walked into the chapel without ever opening a door. She knelt, and for the first time, she spoke in her own voice. What are you? The being whispered, a voice heard not by the ears, but inside the soul. I am the answer you begged for. I am what prays to God when God goes silent. And now, I pray through you. Episode 10. The Mother Superior's Sin. The creature of light vanished before dawn. Not with thunder, not with fire, just a soft, unnatural blink, as if someone had closed a page in a book no one was meant to read. But its presence remained. The air smelled like ash and roses. Every candle burned lower than before. And Elena, she hadn't moved from the altar. She just sat her day, legs folded, lips parted like a relic, or a warning. Mother Beatrice hadn't spoken since the visitation. She'd locked herself in her study, drawn every curtain, covered every crucifix. She prayed, but the words came out wrong, fragmented, like her tongue had forgotten which God to address. She thought no one knew her secret, but Elena did, and worse, the voice did, too. That morning, in front of all the sisters, Elena stood during breakfast and asked, in a clear voice that sounded too calm to be human, Mother, do you remember Sister Amalia? The room fell into stillness, spoons flouncing halfway to mouths, eyes wide, because no one had spoken the name in over 20 years. Mother Beatrice dropped her teacup. Enough, she snapped, trembling. Leave the past alone. Elena tilted her head, as if listening to something just behind her shoulder. Then she whispered, You didn't just silence her. You buried her voice beneath the confessional. You said it was mercy, but the stone still remembers the scream. Beatrice turned pale. Her legs buckled. The confessional booth had been closed for 2 decades, rotted wood, they claimed. But when Father Matteo pried it open, what he found beneath the floorboards wasn't just decay. It was bone, small, fragile, broken in 3 places, buried under a floorboard wrapped in a nun's habit. And in the lining, embroidered faintly, was a name, Amalia. That night, Beatrice confessed, not to a priest, to Elena, because it wasn't a girl kneeling in front of her anymore. It was a mouth for judgment, a vessel, a throne made of flesh and soul. Beatrice wept as she spoke. She was pregnant with a bishop's child. This sin were to silence it, to preserve the church's image. I obeyed. Elena didn't move, didn't blink, but her lips parted, and she sang a lullaby in a language older than any hymn, soft, gentle, terrifying, because as she sang, blood seeped from the confessional wood, and a child's cry echoed through the chapel. Faint, impossible, but real. Beatrice collapsed. Her final words, whispered with cracked lips. I thought I was protecting heaven, but maybe heaven didn't want protection. She died before sunrise. They buried her beneath the old fig tree, the same tree Amalia used to sit beneath, whispering psalms no one had taught her. And for the first time in 20 years, the tree bloomed in winter. That night, Elena returned to her cell, but this time, she prayed aloud, not trembling, not possessed, calm, certain, and the voice that had haunted the convent for months. It whispered only one thing before falling silent. One more sin must speak before the gates can open. Then nothing, only silence, but not peace. Anticipation. Episode 11. The possession that felt like glory. She didn't scream anymore when she prayed. She didn't twitch, or convulse, or fall into trance. Now, Elena glowed. Her skin shimmered faintly in candlelight, not with sweat, but with something that looked like grace made physical. Her voice no longer echoed with otherworldly growls. It rang like a choir singing behind her lips. The sisters feared her more now than ever before. Because the monster had become beautiful, Father Matteo stood in the shadows of the chapel. Watching her pray, she had been at it for hours, whispering in a tone that sounded like worship but felt like a summons. He stepped forward, low, cautious. Elena, he called softly. She turned toward him, smiling. Her eyes were golden now, not brown, not hazel, golden, like the pages of a Bible illuminated by fire. I don't think I'm Elena anymore, she said gently. He hesitated. What are you? Then she tilted her head, listening, always listening to something above or below or behind. Then answered, a chalice, a cradle, a door. That night, she gathered the remaining sisters in the chapel, not by force, by pull. They came as if drawn, each one waking at the exact same moment, walking barefoot across cold stone, forming a circle around Elena without speaking. Even Carmela, even Ines, as if something inside them had been waiting for this. Elena stepped into the center. I've been called possessed, she said, voice calm, but possession is a word we use when we don't understand belonging. She raised her hands, and light poured from them, not like fire, not like miracle, but like truth unbearable in its clarity. Carmela fell to her knees first, weeping uncontrollably. I feel him, she sobbed. Not God, not the one from Sunday sermons. Something older, something brighter. And I'm not afraid. Elena placed her hands on Carmela's head. A soft tremble passed through her, then stillness. When Carmela stood, her eyes were the same golden hue. Then Ines, then Luca. One by one, she touched them all. One by one, they changed, and as each was touched, they began to pray aloud in perfect unison. Different languages, different tones, but the same meaning. Words that felt like creation being rewritten from scratch. Up in the bell tower, the ancient iron bell rang on its own. 1, 2, 3, and then silence, the kind that screams. Father Matteo fled to the library, searching for any record of what this could be. Not demonic, not divine, something in between. He found a torn page in a banned catechism from the 1500s. Beware the glory that seeks its own mouth. When the holy wears human skin, it does not save, it spreads. He slammed the book shut, ran to the chapel, but it was too late. They were floating, all of them. Elena at the center, hands raised, hair lifted by invisible wind. The others around her, eyes closed, glowing golden veins snaking across their skin like rivers of heaven. Matteo fell to his knees. What is this? He whispered. Elena looked down at him, smiling, radiant, terrifying. This is not possession, Father. This is a wedding. Then the walls cracked. The crucifix split, and from the sky inside the chapel light poured in. Not from above, but from within. Episode 12. She stopped praying, but God didn't stop speaking. After that night, Elena never prayed again. Not because she lost faith, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer needed to. Prayer is supposed to be a bridge from earth to heaven, from soul to something greater. But Elena had become something else entirely. She was the bridge now. The voice that once passed through her had taken root, and it no longer required invitation. She walked through the convent with the silence of a saint and the gaze of a god. Birds stopped singing when she passed. Candles lit themselves. Walls no longer bled, they breathed. One by one, the sisters followed her without question. No habits, no rosaries. They chanted in unknown tongues. Hands open, eyes golden. They called themselves the Bright Choir. And Elena, she was no longer Sister Elena. She was simply the mouth. Father Mateo watched it all unfold with a heart crushed beneath the weight of revelation. He had come to cast out a demon. Instead, he had witnessed the arrival of something divine, or worse, something that believed it was divine. He still prayed in secret, and in those whispered prayers, he began to hear replies, but they weren't from God. One evening, he approached Elena in the chapel. "You stopped praying," he said quietly. She turned to him, gentle and radiant. "There's nothing left to ask for," she replied. "But you still hear him." She smiled. "I don't hear him anymore, Father. He hears me." The marble beneath her feet cracked softly, as if even stone was listening. That same night, the village beneath the hill fell silent. No bells, no dogs barking, no fires, just silence. And from the belfry of Santa Luca, light rose into the sky, not a beam, not a flare, but a spiral, like a staircase made of fire and breath, reaching toward the heavens. Then the stars blinked. Literally, every star in the sky dimmed for one full minute. Astronomers across the world recorded it. No one could explain it, but in the convent, Elena whispered, "He's almost here." The Vatican sent no letters, no envoys, no warnings, but deep in Rome, behind locked doors, men in red and gold wept into their sleeves, because they recognized the signs, not of the apocalypse, but of something older, the correction. At sunrise, Elena stood in the courtyard with her choir behind her. She raised one hand. Every tree bent toward her, not from wind, from reverence. And then she said, clearly, "There was a mistake in Eden. I am the correction." Father Mateo fell to his knees. Tears ran down his face. But they weren't from all. They were from understanding. "Who are you really?" he begged. Elena turned to him, and for the first time, there was a trace of sorrow in her golden eyes. "I was the first prayer ever whispered, and the last voice God tried to silence." Later that day, all the church bells in the region rang at the exact same time. No hands touched them, no wind stirred them, they simply rang. Once, twice, 13 times. A count not for saints or sinners, but for something else. And then silence. The kind that doesn't rest. The kind that waits. Episode 13, the gate that opened without keys. The ground cracked beneath the chapel at exactly 3:07 a.m. Not with violence, not with sound, but with the certainty of something finished. Like a seal long ago stamped into the earth had finally been acknowledged, and then dismissed. The sisters gathered in silence. No one called them, no bell rang. Yet they came barefoot, tail, serene as if pulled by gravity that didn't belong to this world. Elena stood at the center, still, eyes closed, hands outstretched, and in front of her, the stone floor began to peel. Yes, peel as if reality itself were a skin being pulled back. Beneath the stone wasn't soil, it wasn't rock, it was light, but not golden, not holy, pure white, pulsing like the breath of something ancient and infinite. The gate, it had no hinges, no handle, no form, it simply was. Father Mateo stood at the edge of the circle, trembling. He held a crucifix in one hand and a gun in the other, not out of violence, but confusion, protection, desperation. He had studied prophecy his entire life, but this was not prophecy. It was correction, a redraft of creation. "Elena," he shouted, her eyes opened, not golden anymore, white, like fresh snow, like blind light, like pages never meant to be written on. "You must stop this," he begged. "You must close it." But she smiled softly, like a mother forgetting a child's misunderstanding. "You cannot close what was never opened by hands. The gate is not a door, it is a remembering." Mateo fell to his knees. "You're summoning something, Elena, something too old, too big for this world." "No," she replied, stepping forward. "I'm welcoming something back." As she approached the gate, her feet did not touch the ground. The sisters behind her began to chant not words, not songs, but vibrations, notes that shimmered in the air like shattered mirrors. And the gate, it responded, It breathed. Then, the sky outside the convent turned black, not from clouds, from absence. Stars vanished. The moon split in two and then reformed like it had blinked. Birds fell silent. Clocks stopped ticking. Time paused. And in that breathless moment, something moved beyond the gate. No shape, no face, just intention, a pressure that pressed against the minds of all present like memory, like awe, like the moment just before a scream. Matteo dropped the crucifix. He saw it now. This wasn't a possession. This wasn't a miracle. It was a return. And Elena was its herald. She turned to them all, arms open, and spoke without lips. We were never meant to be alone. You called it heaven, but it was just the other side of the veil. Then she stepped into the gate and vanished. No sound, no flesh, just gone. And the gate, it remained, waiting. Some say it closed the next day. Others say it never closed at all. The convent was sealed. The church declared it lost to fire. But those who lived nearby spoke of strange lights at night, of hummingbird in dreams, and of a girl in white who walks the forest, barefoot, whispering not prayers, but invitations. Episode 14. The choir that didn't stop singing. Long after Elena stepped into the gate, her choir remained. They no longer spoke with the world. No more letters. No more contact with the diocese. No more mass. Only one thing filled the halls of Santa Luca now. Singing, it began softly, a single voice, Sister Carmela humming a melody no one recognized. Gentle, low, wordless, she stood by the broken altar, eyes closed, arms at her side. Within hours, another voice joined her, then another. By nightfall, all the remaining sisters were singing, always the same tune, always the same rhythm. No sleep, no food, no break. The music never ceased. It rose and fell like breathing, passed from one voice to the next without pause. Even when one collapsed from exhaustion, another took her place, a harmony of human chords arranged by something inhuman. And the strangest part, it was beautiful, painfully, devastatingly beautiful. Father Matteo stayed in the shadows, watching, recording, listening, not out of reverence, out of terror, because deep beneath that beauty, he could hear something else in the song, like hidden notes twisted under the melody, frequencies too low to detect with the ear, but strong enough to make his teeth ache. And the words, he began to understand them, not through translation, through recognition, because they were words of worship, they were instructions. The village below grew restless. Shepherds heard music coming from inside their sheep at night. Children began humming the melody in their sleep. One woman claimed she gave birth in silence. The child emerged smiling, eyes wide, mouth full of a song no one taught him. The mayor ordered the road to the convent blocked. It didn't matter. The music spread anyway. Back in Rome, the Vatican held a closed-door council. The cardinal who read the final report went pale. He quoted only one line from the text before sealing it forever. It is not the Antichrist we must fear, but the angel who remembers what came before Christ. Inside the convent, Matteo confronted him at last. You have to stop, he begged. This music is not holy. But the choir didn't hear him. They just kept singing, eyes glazed, bodies swaying, mouths open in perfect synchronicity. He shouted, screamed. Still, the melody continued. So he fired a gun into the air. The music stopped for 3 seconds, then began again, louder, in and out, with words. She is the vessel and the vine. She drank the silence of God and bloomed. We are the roots beneath the gate. Matteo fled the chapel, heart pounding like a drum of war, as he collapsed on the grass outside. His ears ringing, he realized something chilling. He was still hearing the psalm, but no one was singing anymore. He tried to leave the convent that night. He reached the gate, but the moment he passed the threshold, he felt it, the absence of music. And in that silence, something whispered behind his ear. You've heard it now. You don't get to forget. He turned. No one was there, but the melody had followed him, into his lungs, into his bones. And when he opened his mouth to cry out, his hand, Episode 15, the prayer that was never meant for God. The story was supposed to end with silence. A convent sealed, a girl vanished, a miracle or a blasphemy buried under doctrine and fear. But prayers don't end when the mouths go quiet, not when they were never meant for God to hear. Father Matteo had stopped sleeping. Each time he closed his eyes, the song returned not in memory, but in form. He would feel it pulsing under his skin like a second heartbeat. He tried fasting, he tried exorcism, he even tried forgetting, but faith remembers. And this thing, whatever it was, had no interest in being forgotten. The melody that began in Santa Luca had spread to the villages, to the cities. A boy in Naples began reciting phrases from the manuscript Elena had whispered, though he'd never seen Latin in his life. A woman in Argentina woke up singing in Aramaic, with burn marks shaped like queens on her back. And one morning, every nun in a Carmelite convent in France vanished, only to reappear a day later, kneeling in the same positions, humming the same tune. Their eyes whitened, their veins lit gold. The Vatican finally acted. Too late. In secret, Matteo returned to the chapel. The gate was still there, but it no longer glowed. It waited, like a throat waiting for a voice. The choir was gone, only echoes remained, but the air of the walls still breathed. And when he stood where Elena once stood, he heard it, not singing, not command, a prayer, but not from earth, from the other side, words unspoken but understood, a language that had no beginning. It said, "We were here before breath, we listened before there were names, and now, finally, you have prayed to us." Matteo fell to his knees, not in worship, in surrender, because he finally understood all of this. Elena, the possession, the gate, the choir had never been about salvation. It was about attention. Something had waited in the dark since the dawn of creation, not evil, not good, but forgotten. And when Elena prayed, she didn't reach God. She reached it, the first silence, the watcher between stars, the breath that came before the word. And it answered, because someone finally spoke his name. Matteo opened his journal one last time. He wrote, "We mistook horror for holiness, and reverence for rapture. She wasn't possessed, she was invited, and the prayer, the one she carried inside her, it was never for God." Then he turned the final page, and added one more line, "And now, neither is mine." He entered the gate that night. No one saw him go, but in the hours before dawn, a soft humming echoed from the mountains, and every child born that night opened its eyes already singing. The world didn't end, but it changed. Churches emptied, songs filled the streets. Not worship, not rebellion, just recognition, like the world was finally hearing what it had ignored for too long. And if you visit Santa Luca today, all you'll find is stone, cold, abandoned, but stand long enough, and you'll hear it, the soft, ancient, unstoppable, a single voice, humming, waiting for yours to join in.